My name is Eli Navarro, 20 years old, and standing here in front of my grandfather's weathered farmhouse, I feel like that scared 8-year-old kid all over again. The same kid who watched his parents' taillights disappear down this gravel road 12 years ago, never looking back. But today isn't about them. Today is about saying goodbye to the only man who ever truly stayed. Grandpa Silas's funeral was held in the small chapel downtown, the same one where he'd taught me to fix the ancient pipe organ when I was 14. The service was quiet, filled mostly with neighbors whose tractors he'd repaired over the years, and a handful of folks from the hardware store where he'd bought parts for his endless projects. I sat in the front pew, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to process the fact that the man who raised me was really gone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The farmhouse feels frozen in time now. His coffee mug still sits on the kitchen counter, a ring of dried coffee staining the bottom. His work boots wait by the back door, caked with Nebraska dirt and machine oil. The smell of burnt coffee and old wood fills every corner, along with something else, the faint scent of solder and electrical components that always seem to follow him around. "Eli, you holding up okay?" Arlo Jensen's voice breaks through my thoughts. My oldest friend stands in the doorway, his worn baseball cap twisted backwards, grease still under his fingernails from whatever engine he'd been working on that morning. Arlo and I grew up together, bonding over the shared project of restoring his grandfather's old Chevy pickup. While other kids played video games, we learned the language of carburetors and timing belts. "Yeah, I'm managing," I lie, grateful for his presence. Arlo has this way of making everything feel a little less heavy. That's when I hear it, the low rumble of an expensive engine pulling up the gravel drive. Through the window, I watch a sleek black sedan park beside the cluster of pickup trucks and farm vehicles. My stomach drops as two familiar figures step out. Veronica and Mason Navarro, my parents. They look exactly like they did in the Christmas cards they'd occasionally send, polished, successful, untouched by the kind of work that leaves permanent stains under your fingernails. Veronica adjusts her designer sunglasses while Mason smooths his jacket, both of them scanning the farmhouse like they're evaluating real estate. "We rushed back from Europe the moment we heard," Veronica says as they approach the porch, her voice carrying that practiced tone of grief I remember from childhood performances. "Poor Silas, we should have been here sooner." I nod politely, my jaw tight. Should have been here sooner, like they should have been here for the past 12 years. Like they should have been here when Grandpa taught me to read circuit diagrams by lamplight, or when he stayed up all night helping me build my first robot for the county science fair. "The lawyer wants to meet with us tomorrow," Mason says, his eyes already calculating. "Something about the will." Mr. Frederick Lang, Grandpa's attorney, had mentioned a private reading, but looking at my parents now, their practiced sympathy barely concealing something hungrier underneath, I get the feeling tomorrow is going to change everything. And I have no idea how right I am. The next morning, Mr. Frederick Lang arrived at the farm driving his ancient Buick, the same car he'd been using to visit Grandpa for legal matters since I was a kid. Lang was one of those old-school lawyers who still wore suspenders and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had survived 2 world wars. But behind his wire-rimmed glasses were sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Eli, Veronica, Mason," he nodded to each of us in turn. Silas left very specific instructions about how this was to be handled. "We'll need to go to the barn." My parents exchanged glances. Veronica's perfectly manicured eyebrow arched. "The barn? Frederick, surely there's been some mistake. Shouldn't we be discussing this in your office?" Lang's expression remained neutral. Silas was very particular about the location. "Please, follow me." We walked across the farmyard, past the chicken coop I'd helped rebuild when I was 16, past the workshop where Grandpa had taught me to weld. The barn doors creaked as Lang pushed them open, revealing the familiar smell of hay and motor oil. But instead of stopping at his workbench, Lang led us to a corner I'd never paid much attention to. He knelt down and brushed away decades of dust and loose boards, revealing a metal trapdoor I'd never known existed. My heart started pounding as he produced an old brass key. "Your grandfather was a man who believed in preparation," Lang said, pulling open the trapdoor to reveal a small concrete chamber below. Inside sat a rusted safe, the kind you'd see in an old Western movie. He installed this in 1987, the year he moved here. The combination lock required both a key and a numerical code. Lang seemed to know both by heart. When the heavy door swung open, I expected to see stacks of cash or maybe some old family documents. Instead, there were manila folders, a few small wooden boxes, and what looked like legal paperwork. Lang pulled out the first document and cleared his throat. The last will and testament of Silas Henry Navarro. His voice carried across the barn like a judge reading a verdict. "To my grandson Eli, I leave the farmhouse, the barn, all buildings and structures on this property, and my personal effects. The land itself is to be held in trust." I felt a wave of relief. At least I'd have a home. But Lang wasn't finished. However, all bank accounts, investment portfolios, business holdings, and intellectual property rights are to be transferred to... He paused, double-checking the document. "Micah Navarro." The silence that followed was deafening. Veronica's face went white, then red. Mason stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Who the hell is Micah Navarro?" I stood there, my mind reeling. In all my years with Grandpa, he'd never mentioned anyone named Micah, not once. Lang pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's careful handwriting. "Silas instructed me to give you this immediately after the reading." With shaking hands, I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Eli, the truth is in the legacy. Follow it. You're stronger than you know. Grandpa Silas." "This is ridiculous," Veronica snapped. "There must be some mistake. Who is this Micah person? Some random stranger can't just inherit everything." Mason was already pacing. "Frederick, we need to contest this. Clearly Silas wasn't in his right mind." But I barely heard them. I was staring at that name. Micah Navarro. Same last name? Family? But Grandpa had always told me I was his only grandchild. That evening, after Lang had locked the safe and departed with promises to research the legal requirements for locating Micah, my parents cornered me in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Grandpa had taught me to make his terrible coffee and even worse pancakes. "Eli, we need to talk," Veronica said, her voice taking on that honeyed tone I remembered from childhood when she wanted something. "This whole Micah situation is obviously some kind of mix-up. Frederick will sort it out, but in the meantime, we should stick together as a family." Mason nodded, leaning against the counter where Grandpa's coffee mug still sat. "Look, son, we know we weren't around much when you were growing up. We had our careers, our obligations overseas. But we're here now. Now. When there might be money involved." The irony wasn't lost on me. "What are you suggesting?" I asked, though I already knew. "We split everything 3 ways, Mason said. "Once we prove this Micah person doesn't exist, or has no legal claim, family takes care of family, right?" I wanted to laugh, or maybe scream. Family takes care of family? Where was that philosophy when I was 8 years old, standing on this very porch with a suitcase, watching them drive away? "I need some air," I said, pushing past them and walking out into the night. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The stars above the farm were brilliant, unpolluted by city lights. Grandpa and I used to sit on the porch after dinner, him telling me stories about the constellations, while we listened to the radio chatter from his old ham setup. Those were the nights I felt most at peace, most like I belonged somewhere. 20 minutes later, I heard Arlo's pickup truck rumbling up the drive. He found me sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the dark fields. "Rough day?" he asked, settling down beside me with 2 bottles of beer from the cooler in his truck. I told him everything. About the safe, about Micah, about my parents' sudden interest in family unity. Arlo listened without interrupting, occasionally shaking his head or muttering under his breath. "So let me get this straight," he said when I finished. "Your grandfather, who was basically a genius, leaves his money to some mystery person named Micah, and your parents, who haven't visited in 12 years, suddenly want to play house?" "That's about the size of it." Arlo took a long drink from his beer. "Well, your parents are definitely up to something. But Silas? That man never did anything without a reason. If he named this Micah guy, there's got to be more to the story." Quote, "The next morning, I found another envelope slipped under my bedroom door. This one was thicker, older, and had simply, 'When you're ready,' written on the outside in Grandpa's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet with an address, Mrs. Clarice Holloway, 412 Elm Street, and below that, just 2 words, 'Trust her.' I knew Mrs. Holloway by reputation. She'd been the town's midwife for 40 years before retiring, but I'd never understood why Grandpa would want me to talk to her. Unless Mrs. Clarice Holloway lived in a Victorian house that looked like it belonged in a different century. Wind chimes sang on her wraparound porch, and her garden was a riot of colors that somehow managed to look organized rather than chaotic. When I knocked on her screen door, she answered immediately, as if she'd been expecting me. "You're Silas's boy," she said, looking me up and down with sharp blue eyes. "You have his hands. Come in, but wipe your feet." Her living room was a museum of small-town life. Dozens of baby photos on the mantelpiece, quilts draped over every surface, and the persistent smell of lavender and old books. She gestured for me to sit on a floral sofa that had probably been there since the Carter administration. "You want to know about Micah," she said before I could speak. I pulled out Grandpa's note. "He told me to trust you." Clarice studied the paper, then walked to an old secretary desk in the corner. From a locked drawer, she pulled out a leather-bound ledger that looked ancient. "I delivered that boy 21 years ago," she said, settling into a rocking chair. "Your grandfather's biological grandson, son of Anna Navarro, Silas's daughter." The world seemed to tilt. Grandpa had a daughter? Anna was from his first marriage, long before he moved here. She got pregnant young, ran away from home. Silas spent years trying to find her. Clarice's voice grew softer. When Anna finally contacted him, she was dying. Complications from the birth. She asked Silas to take care of the baby. I felt like I was drowning. But why didn't he? The state wouldn't let him. Anna hadn't listed Silas as next of kin, and by the time the paperwork got sorted, little Micah had been placed with a foster family. Silas tried for months to get him back, but the system, she shrugged. Sometimes the system fails good people. So where is he now? Clarice turned a page in her ledger. Last I heard, he aged out of foster care at 18. That was 3 years ago. Silas never stopped looking for him, even hired private investigators. I stared at my hands, Grandpa's hands, according to Clarice. Was I just a replacement? The old woman's expression softened. "Oh, honey, the day your parents dropped you off, Silas called me crying. Not because he didn't want you, but because he was so angry at how they'd treated you. He said you reminded him of himself at that age, lost, but full of potential. You weren't a replacement, Eli. You were a gift." Armed with Clarice's information, Arlo and I spent the next 2 days diving into public records, online databases, and social media searches. Finding someone who'd been in the foster system wasn't easy. Privacy laws meant most records were sealed, and Micah Navarro wasn't exactly an uncommon name. We finally caught a break at the county records office. A sympathetic clerk named Janet remembered processing paperwork for a Micah Navarro who'd aged out of care and moved to Lincoln, about an hour east. Smart kid, she remembered. Polite, too. Always came in with all his paperwork organized. Never gave us any trouble. I felt bad for him. Most of these kids don't have anybody looking out for them. From Lincoln, we traced him to a community college where he'd studied for a year before dropping out. The trail went cold after that, but we found one more clue at a local youth center, a forwarding address for mail, dated 8 months ago. That address led us to an apartment complex on the wrong side of Lincoln, the kind of place where people minded their own business and asked no questions. The current tenant had never heard of Micah, but the building manager remembered him. Quiet guy, paid his rent on time, never caused trouble. Left about 6 months ago, said he was heading west. Oregon? Maybe? Or was it Washington? The manager scratched his graying beard. Had a truck loaded down with everything he owned. Didn't look like much. It was Arlo who found the real breakthrough. While I was getting frustrated with dead ends, he was methodically calling every shelter, youth service, and social service office within a 200-mile radius. On his 15th call, he hit gold. Portland City Mission, he said, covering the phone with his hand. They have a Eli Navarro who's been staying there on and off for the past 3 months. The guy's about the right age. My heart started racing. What do we do? We drive to Portland, Arlo said simply. It's only about 8 hours. We can be there by tonight. But first, I had one more stop to make. Back at the farm, I went to Grandpa's study, a converted bedroom where he kept his important papers and his collection of technical manuals. I'd been avoiding it since the funeral, but now I needed to see if there were any other secrets hidden there. In the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath a stack of old Engineering Today magazines, I found a small wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside was a ring, simple silver band with an inscription, "Honor, not blood." Wrapped around the ring was a note, "For Micah when he comes home." SN. We were loading Arlo's truck for the drive to Portland when my parents' rental car pulled up fast, gravel spraying. Mason got out first, his face red with anger, followed by Veronica clutching a manila folder. "Going somewhere, Eli?" Mason's voice had that dangerous edge I remembered from childhood. "Portland," I said, not bothering to lie, following up on a lead about Micah. Veronica stepped forward, her designer heels clicking on the farmhouse steps. "We've been doing some research of our own, and we think this whole Micah situation is fraudulent." She opened the folder and pulled out what looked like legal documents. "We've petitioned for an emergency injunction to freeze all of Silas's assets, pending a thorough investigation. And we're contesting the will on grounds of mental incompetence." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You can't do that." "We can, and we did," Mason said. "Furthermore, we've contacted the sheriff's department about potential fraud. If this Micah person exists, he's probably some con artist who took advantage of a confused old man." That's when I lost it. 12 years of suppressed anger came pouring out. Confused, Grandpa was sharper at 80 than you've ever been. He was designing circuit boards while you were off playing big shot in Europe. "Don't you dare take that tone with me," Mason snapped. "We're your parents. You stopped being my parents the day you drove away and left me here." Arlo stepped between us. "Everybody cool it. This isn't helping anybody." A new car pulled up. Mr. Lang's old Buick. The lawyer got out slowly, his face grim. "I've been trying to reach you, Eli. We have a problem." He explained that my parents' injunction had been granted pending a hearing. All of Silas's bank accounts were frozen, the property was under court supervision, and I was temporarily barred from making any major decisions about the estate. "How long?" I asked. "Could be months. The court wants definitive proof that Micah Navarro exists and has a legitimate claim. Without that..." Lang shrugged helplessly. Veronica smiled triumphantly. "Maybe now you'll be reasonable about working together as a family." But I was already walking toward Arlo's truck. "We're still going to Portland." "Eli, wait," Lang called after me. "If you find this young man, bring him back. The court date is set for next Friday. We'll need him to testify." The Portland City Mission sat in a neighborhood that had seen better decades. The building itself was clean but worn, the kind of place that survived on donations and determination. Inside, the smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with the aroma of whatever they were serving for dinner. The intake coordinator, a tired-looking woman named Sarah, was initially reluctant to give us any information. "We protect our residents' privacy. I can't just tell random people who's staying here." "Please," I said, pulling out the ring and Grandpa's note. "This is important. Family important." Something in my voice must have convinced her, because she agreed to pass along a message. 20 minutes later, a young man appeared in the lobby doorway. Micah Navarro was slightly taller than me, with dark hair that needed cutting and clothes that had seen better days. But it was his eyes that struck me. They had the same intense focus I'd seen in old photos of Grandpa as a young man. "You're looking for me?" His voice was cautious, defensive. I couldn't blame him. I stood up, suddenly unsure how to begin. "I'm Eli Navarro. I think we might be related." Micah's expression didn't change. "Never heard of you." Arlo nudged me encouragingly. I took a deep breath and started from the beginning. "The funeral, the will, the safe, everything." Micah listened without interrupting, his face carefully neutral. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "So you're telling me some old man I've never met left me money, and you drove 8 hours to find me because you're such a nice guy?" "I'm telling you," I said, pulling out my phone and showing him photos of the farm, "that Silas Navarro was your grandfather, and mine, and that he never stopped looking for you." I showed him the ring, the note, everything. Micah examined each item carefully, his defenses slowly cracking. "I remember him," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "When I was really little, maybe 4 or 5, this old guy would visit sometimes. He always brought mechanical toys, robots, remote control cars. He'd stay for hours, teaching me how they worked." Micah's eyes filled with tears. "Then one day he just stopped coming. My caseworker said family visits were discontinued. I asked about him for years, but nobody would tell me anything." "He tried to get custody," I said. "The system wouldn't let him." Micah laughed bitterly. "The system? Yeah, I know all about the system." He looked at me again, studying my face. "So you're the kid who got to live with him?" "Yeah, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me." We talked for another hour. Micah told me about bouncing between foster homes, aging out at 18 with nothing but a high school diploma and a bus ticket. He'd been trying to make it on his own ever since, working construction jobs, living in shelters when the work dried up. "Why should I trust you?" he asked finally. "For all I know, this is some elaborate scam." I understood his suspicion. If our positions were reversed, I'd be just as cautious. But then I remembered something Grandpa used to say when I doubted myself. "Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith, Eli. But make sure you're jumping towards something worth catching." "Because," I said, "Grandpa left you everything for a reason. And because you deserve to know the truth about where you came from." Micah was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked up. "If I come with you, and I'm not saying I will, what happens then?" "Then we go home," I said, "and we figure out what Grandpa really wanted." The courtroom in our county seat was packed for what the local paper had dubbed the mystery air case. My parents sat with their lawyer, an expensive-looking man from Omaha, who'd probably cost them more than most people made in a year. On our side sat Mr. Lang, myself, Micah, and Clarice Holloway, who'd agreed to testify. Micah had been nervous during the drive back from Portland, asking dozens of questions about the legal process and what would happen if the court didn't believe him. I didn't have good answers. All I could do was trust that Grandpa had planned for this somehow. The judge, a stern woman named Margaret Hendricks, called the hearing to order. Mason and Veronica's lawyer spoke first, arguing that the will was invalid because Silas had been suffering from dementia and had been manipulated by unknown parties. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying the authority of expensive legal training, "there is no documented relationship between the deceased and this alleged grandson. No birth certificates, no adoption papers, no legal acknowledgement whatsoever. This appears to be an elaborate fraud designed to steal a substantial inheritance from the legitimate heirs." When it was our turn, Lang stood slowly. He'd seemed frailer during the past week, but his voice was strong as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, Silas Navarro was one of the most methodical men I've ever known. Every decision he made was carefully considered and legally sound. If he named Micah Navarro as his heir, it was because Micah Navarro is exactly who Silas believed him to be." Lang called Clarice to the stand first. She testified about delivering Micah, about Anna's death, and about Silas's attempts to gain custody. She'd brought her delivery records from 1984, carefully preserved in her leather ledger. "I delivered that boy with these hands," she said, looking directly at the judge, and I watched Silas Navarro cry like a baby when the state took him away. When Micah took the stand, he was visibly nervous but determined. He spoke about his early memories of Silas, about the toys and the visits that stopped abruptly when he was 5. The judge asked him several pointed questions about his background and motivations. "Mr. Navarro," Judge Hendricks said, "you understand that if this will is upheld, you stand to inherit a substantial amount of money." "Yes, ma'am," Micah replied, "but honestly, I'd give it all up just to know that someone was looking for me all those years." Then, Lang did something unexpected. He approached the bench and handed the judge a small object, the ring from Grandpa's desk. "Your Honor, Silas Navarro was an engineer. He believed in verification and proof. This ring contains a microchip, encoded with DNA data, birth records, and a message that could only be accessed by the rightful heir." The judge examined the ring under a magnifying glass, then handed it to the court clerk for technical analysis. 20 minutes later, the clerk returned with a printout. "The chip is genuine and contains extensive documentation," the judge announced, "including DNA analysis proving that Micah Navarro is indeed the biological grandson of the deceased." Veronica gasped audibly. Mason's face went purple with rage. Judge Hendricks banged her gavel. "The will is upheld. Micah Navarro is the legal heir to the specified assets. Court dismissed." 3 months later, Micah and I were standing in the barn, which had been transformed from a storage space into something that looked like a cross between a machine shop and a computer lab. The concrete floor was now polished and painted. Workbenches lined the walls, and new lighting made everything bright and clean. "Your grandfather was apparently sitting on a gold mine," Micah said, reviewing the financial documents spread across one of the tables. "Patents, royalties, investment accounts. The man was worth over $2 million. All from engineering work he did before he moved here," I said. "Lang found records going back to the 1970s. Aerospace contracts, defense projects, computer chip designs. Grandpa was basically a genius who decided to become a farmer." Micah picked up one of Grandpa's old journals. "Did you know he'd been planning this place for years? He called it Navarro Works, a training center for kids who wanted to learn engineering and technology." I hadn't known, but it made perfect sense. Grandpa had always been passionate about teaching, about passing on knowledge. He'd spent 12 years preparing me. Apparently, he'd been planning to prepare others, too. "So what do you think?" I asked. "Want to make it happen?" Micah grinned, the first completely relaxed expression I'd seen from him. "I think your grandfather would kick our asses if we didn't." Arlo joined us that afternoon, officially becoming our first employee and head of mechanical instruction. We spent the rest of the day planning curriculum, designing workspaces, and figuring out how to turn Grandpa's vision into reality. "You know," Micah said as we took a break for dinner, "I never thanked you." "For what?" "For coming to find me. For believing I was real when your parents were calling me a fraud. For," he gestured around the barn, "for sharing all this instead of fighting me for it." I thought about that for a moment. Grandpa used to tell me that legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you pass on. I think he knew we'd figure that out. 5 years later, I'm standing in the same barn, watching a dozen teenagers work on their final projects for the summer session. There's Maria, whose robotic prosthetic hand will help her younger brother who lost his arm in an accident. There's James, whose solar-powered water purification system could help rural communities worldwide. And there's Alex, who reminds me so much of myself at that age, quiet, focused, brilliant, in ways he doesn't even recognize yet. The framed photo of Grandpa Silas sits on the mantelpiece we installed near the barn's entrance. Beneath it is a glass case containing the ring that proved Micah's identity, along with a plaque that reads, "Legacy is who shows up when no one else does." Navarro Works has grown beyond anything we'd originally imagined. We have partnerships with 3 universities, a scholarship program funded by Grandpa's patents, and a waiting list of kids who want to spend their summers learning to build the future. Micah runs the program with the kind of passionate dedication that would have made Grandpa proud. Me? I finished my mechanical engineering degree through night classes and now teach the advanced robotics track. But more importantly, I finally understand what Grandpa was trying to teach me all those years ago. That family isn't about blood or money or legal documents. It's about showing up. It's about staying when things get hard. It's about taking what you've been given and making it into something bigger than yourself. My parents never did come back. Last I heard, they were in Australia, chasing some other opportunity. The funny thing is, I don't feel angry about it anymore. They missed out on the best parts of life because they were always looking for something else, somewhere else. Grandpa knew that real treasure isn't hidden in safes or locked away in bank accounts. It's in the knowledge you pass on, the lives you touch, and the people who choose to stay long enough to build something beautiful together. Sometimes, late at night when the barn is quiet and I'm working on lesson plans for the next day, I can almost hear his voice. "Well done, Eli. You've got a knack for this." And for the first time in my life, I truly believe him. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.